From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi, welcome to the program. It has come to this. The CTU has rolled out the big, giant, inflatable rat, so you know that can't be good. On the program today, we are going to be talking about education and a lot of things, because after a couple of weeks of being told that some kind of agreement was getting close, the teachers union and the Chicago Public Schools seem to be further apart than what we've been led to believe. And one of the big sticking points seems to be the increasing likelihood that the CPS will have to close many, many schools. Karen Lewis said maybe as many as 100 yesterday. So the speculation is that the teachers are trying to figure out ways to protect the hundreds and hundreds of jobs that might be lost in the near future. In any case, Karen Lewis has now been given the sole authority to call a strike, and it's getting tense, but I think we can say not panicky, at least not yet. And national politics becomes local. The anointment of Paul Ryan isn't causing most American Latinos to jump for joy, either here in Chicago or in places like, say, Florida. We have two star blogger communicators joining us today on Chicago Newsroom. They'll have a lot to say about all of this, and I'm talking about Matt Farmer, who blogs for the Huffington Post and has been associated with the CTU in a lot of different ways, and I'm sure you'll have some great insight for us today, Matt. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And Achy Obejas, old friend, joining us again here on the program. Thanks for being with us. Achy blogs at the WBEZ blog and has commentary, has years of commentary about everything important that happens in our culture. So, Matt, we are at that point where there's nervous making. I mean, everybody who gets to rattle chains is rattling chains. The board yesterday authorized $25 million for handling the schools during the strikes, and they gave Karen Lewis the authorization. If she wants to pull the trigger, she can. Are we at the brink?
2 weeks ago, I did a community education forum up in Rogers Park. I was a panelist with some CTU folks on there as well. And an audience member asked each of us the question whether there would be a strike. My answer 2 weeks ago was, I haven't the foggiest idea. I'm not a gambling man. I buy lotto tickets about once every 5 years. But if you ask me today, I believe there will be a strike. Whether that strike begins on September 4th, September 24th, October 4th, remains to be seen.
Well, that's the first time that I've seen someone in the media who I regard as being knowledgeable making that statement.
Well, I'm the father. My youngest child will start 5th grade in a Chicago public school, so I hope we avoid a strike. But from everything I pick up, talking to folks, talking to teachers, talking to folks in union leadership, it just seems we're moving in that direction, in part because I think teachers are viewing what's going on as not just a one-time, let's get this agreement signed deal, but they're viewing the future of their profession in the balance. And we can talk about, I think, two different world views as to what public education should look like, one held by the folks down at 125 South Clark, and the other held by the people who staff the classrooms. And I think that is going to cause the, ultimately what I believe will be a strike.
So there's a deep philosophical divide, a sort of almost a cultural, political divide that's feeding some of this.
I think so.
It's not just an issue about, no, it should be 2%, it should be 3.4% or whatever. I mean, although that's important, I'm sure.
I think that this union leadership, while they're certainly interested in securing the best deal in terms of compensation and benefits they can for their members, they are equally, if not more interested in making sure that classrooms for the kids in Chicago are providing the types of education for those kids that the mayor wants to see for his own children. And I think their talk of providing a rich day for kids rather than just a longer day or full day is part of what hangs in the balance. Obviously there are issues with this proposed merit or performance pay system that's being foisted upon teachers, not just in Chicago but around the country. And there's been some serious criticism leveled at attempts to tie salary to standardized test scores, for example. So there are many, many issues, but it seems these negotiations have been going on, I think, since last November. And
Long time, yeah.
many of the big issues are still in nascent stages here of discussion. So how this is going to play out in the next few weeks, next month and a half, I don't know. But
well, let's stay on that sort of big picture thing and bring you into this, Achy. How did we get to this? I mean, did the election of Rahm Emanuel play a part in this? Would it be different today if Rahm hadn't been elected mayor, or are the economic pressures so great that this was something that was this was a slow-moving freight train coming toward us either way, and it had to happen?
Well, it had to happen, I think, and I think it's going to happen worse, because I think one of the things that has come up in these negotiations is that even if they manage to resolve this stuff, there's so much deeper trouble. The waters are so bleak and black on the budget here that no matter how you slice it, no matter who the mayor is, 3, 4, 5 years from now, this thing is still going to be, just waiting to explode. There is an economic bomb embedded in the budget at CPS. It's just that simple. I think the element that Rahm brings to it is that by pushing the longer day, he has completely ignited I think emotions on both sides. Because when he first proposed the longer day, he didn't say, a longer day and we're going to find some way to pay the teachers. It was the longer day and you care about the students, don't you? Because I remember that whole rhetoric, like the teachers were somehow, jerks because they didn't want to put in an extra 2.5 hours of work, which usually, my parents were both public school teachers, not in Chicago, but nonetheless. But I know that more work at school means more work at home, no matter how you slice it for a teacher. I think most people think teachers are working only when they're in front of the classroom. That the preparation for those 5, 6 classes that they teach every day actually happens in that 1-hour prep period and at lunch. And somehow papers get magically graded during that period as well. It's fascinating to me that people think teachers have it so
it is
easy.
interesting because, I mean, our tradition of labor relations is such that no mayor would probably ask sanitation workers to work an extra couple of hours a week for no additional pay or any. I'm not picking on sanitation.
And he wasn't asking him for a couple hours a week. He was asking a couple hours a day,
well, yeah,
which amounted
depending on where you are and everything else.
And it amounted to like an extra day.
Right.
I heard an interesting perspective a couple of days ago, and I think it was on Steve Edwards' show on WBEZ. And he was talking to, I think, Little Lens from Catalyst, and one of the things they discussed was the role the mayor would play historically in resolving these sorts of teacher CPS negotiations when they came down to the wire. And they went back to the Harold Washington days, and even some of the disputes during the Daley era. And the mayor's role,
Jane Byrne too.
Oh, definitely.
The mayor's role is
Byrne's
described
big
was somebody
role.
who could, bring the parties together, be a voice of reason, and let's figure out a way to get this figure out a way to get this worked out. But the problem here that Steve and his guests were talking about was that Rahm injected himself at the front end of this.
Right. So he is one of the partisans.
Staking out his agenda,
Yeah.
demonizing teachers.
Right.
And it's continuing. If you read coverage of the negotiations, you hear from Becky Carroll in the CPS press office describing negotiations as positive, and we're moving forward, and everything is good, and we're hopeful and optimistic.
Her assessments are always real shiny.
Right. In that way, what happens when things go south, and if there's a strike, it's going to look like, well, it was only those teachers who weren't playing nice in the negotiation room. And so, but then again, that's why as CPS's central office continues to shrink, Becky Carroll's office continues to expand in terms of its budget.
And we're also seeing something that several of these things are just sort of personal points of aggravation to me as someone who's been around and covering this for a long time. But we're seeing the conversation now about, well, now that you've drained the reserves and you've emptied the piggy bank, even if we do get through this year, what will you do next year? And the answer is, we'll cut back on the central office.
Right.
And I'm sorry if I've told this joke too many times, but you know, there's the Onion thing about Oprah loses 1,000th pound, and I think that we have cut somewhere in the neighborhood of 40,000 workers from the central office in the last 20 years, because every time you have to go back to the larder, you just say, oh, we just saved $8 million by reducing staff at the central office. You couldn't reduce. If you reduced everybody, you wouldn't be able to deal with this.
There is tons of dead wood in the central office, and I say that as someone who worked there briefly. Mm-hmm. I was hired the very day that Ruth Love got fired, and
to do what?
To do speech writing and PR.
Oh,
I was working for George Munoz.
Okay.
And you know, I can honestly tell you that the dead wood is pretty thick. In the central office, but
well,
but I don't think that there is any way that if you got that central office to 5 people,
right,
that would solve the budget crisis.
I actually worked for the public radio station when it was owned by the Chicago public school system, and when they moved to that glorious period when they were at Pershing Road.
Oh yes, that's when I was
and
there.
Our little studios were tucked away in the corner somewhere, but there was a 2 square block building. I mean, 2 city blocks filled with desks full of people, and you would walk through there. It would take 20 minutes to walk from one end to the other, and you would think, what are all these people? Yeah. But anyway,
especially because of the lack of hustle and bustle.
Right. Anyway, but we digress. The point is that someone has painted ourselves into a corner here that is going to be almost impossible to extricate ourselves from.
But let's look at what happened just yesterday at the Board of Education meeting. Despite the fiscal woes that the district is facing, they announced that they were going to come up with $25 million to staff centers of some sort and house and feed the kids.
All right, should there be a strike?
You know, where did this money come from? Again, under the cushions and the couches at central office, nobody said. They still haven't announced yet where the $45 million to $50 million that was going to fund the interim agreement on hiring back 477 displaced teachers, where that is going to come from. And you
Magic money.
Well, this is something that I thought maybe you could help us understand, because there is this whole conversation about these teachers who are supposed to be hired, and now the CTU is saying that, I mean, we're getting the first hints that there's dissatisfaction with that process, that a lot of the teachers aren't being hired, or that it's not working out in the, what is it, track E that's in now, right? The schools that are in right now.
About a third of the students are in school now.
That apparently this longer day thing is not working out to the teachers or the CTU's satisfaction in some ways. Do you have insight into what that problem is?
I've just heard anecdotally from teachers I've talked to that, you know, there have been issues certainly with getting some of these spots filled, these spots that were announced, whether for art or music teachers, foreign language teachers, bringing back displaced teachers to fill those, that is not happening with the, I guess, necessary speed to have these spots filled for the start of the school year.
Is it your understanding that the surplus teachers are not being hired, or that they're just not hiring anybody, that the process is not happening?
I don't have a good understanding.
Because those would be 2 very important differences.
And I don't have a good understanding of that. As far as the longer day goes, I've also heard you know, the way that the day has been scheduled and rescheduled since last February, when it was going to be 7.5 hours down to 7 hours. The shuffling that's gone on to make sure teachers have planning periods and lunches. You know, there are now teachers who are being told their lunch is going to be first period of the day. You know, so problems like that, whether teachers are going to be out staffing recess, you know. I think that'll all shake out in some manner in the next few months, and you know, that may be in part why schools may open for a month, to see across the city how this longer day plays out.
So that may be one of the union's tactics, is let the schools open for a month or two. They take a look at it.
It could be. I don't know.
Well, okay, we've got so many questions about this, and we really ought to maybe move on. Let's come back and talk about some of the research that you've been doing about the recent announcement about the ACT school or the score improvements. But Achy, I really want to make sure we spend a good amount of time talking about some of the things that you've raised in your blog in the last couple of days. This Paul Ryan guy, who's almost local. I mean, we can drive up there in an hour. You feel that he's not going to play very well in the Latino community, local or national. Why? Why would you say such a thing?
Well, I mean, he simply has no profile whatsoever with Latinos. The particular district that he's from, the 1st Congressional in Wisconsin, is a primarily white, very middle class district. 90% of the voters are white. There are maybe 4% Latino registered voters, 6% Latinos in the district. So he's never really had occasion to, consider issues in a very close way that have to do with Latinos. And he really has not much of a record. On immigration, he's against immigration reform. He's for higher, border security. He's for E-Verify. He's against the DREAM Act. And then when you look at issues aside from immigration that Latinos really care about, actually issues that top immigration in every poll after poll after poll about Latino interests, issues such as healthcare, issues such as education. He's a disaster. Latinos actually do want the government to provide healthcare as a community. And they also do want the government to provide education. Education is very important for, I think, immigrants in general.
I was going to say, this is not a Latino thing.
Yeah, this is immigrants in general.
Right.
And because, the whole notion of coming here is to improve your life and improve your life for your family. The things that you want, that this country offers, that are so spectacular compared to, say, the third world, which is where a lot of immigrants are coming from these days, but especially Latinos, are education and healthcare. And in both of those cases, real simple stuff. Ryan is just not hitting it. I mean, not only is he totally against Obamacare, but he's voted to strip the Pell Grants. He's all about vouchers. He's all about private insurance for healthcare. I mean, the more paperwork that you throw at people, that they have to make decisions about, that they have to, figure out, the more confusing it becomes. I mean, I always tell people, I am a very well-educated person. I think I'm pretty smart. I'm fully bilingual. And every time I've ever had to go to the emergency room, and my emergency room, my closest emergency room is at the University of Chicago, I'm always a little bit dazzled by the paperwork. So I try to imagine what it would be like for someone who maybe only has a high school education, for whom English is a second language. How do you get through that without making terrible mistakes in a moment, frankly, of panic and crisis?
Actually, can I ask you, if we put aside for a minute Marco Rubio from Florida, who out of Romney's shortlist would have better filled the bill for a VP choice with respect to the issues you're raising with Latino voters?
It's a good question you're asking, but Marco Rubio actually would not have.
I understand, and I understand why, but I just.
Yeah, I actually think his best choice, and I don't say this because I support her, okay, but I say this because just on a cold, analysis, she would fit the bill.
Jan Brewer. No, not Jan Brewer. Okay.
No. Governor Susana Martinez from New Mexico, I think, would have been an excellent choice. She's a woman. She is just as ugly on all the issues around immigration as you want somebody to be, but she's not quite as ugly on this other stuff. She's not good on Obamacare, but she's actually not horrible, and she is in tune with her community, and she knows how to talk to them. If you wanted a second choice, you could go with Brian Sandoval, the governor of Nevada, and that would have probably tipped Nevada.
You actually raised a very interesting point that Ryan actually agrees with you on the Cuban embargo, which maybe this is one point where you guys are on the same page, but probably won't play very well in the Cuban community in Florida. So here's this guy who's trying to win Florida, and he's having some difficulty with the aged folks, and now he may be having some difficulties. Anyway, that's
You know,
that's
really,
for Florida Newsroom to talk about, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, he has a record of wanting to lift the embargo, which is a very important issue to older Cubans. But a lot of those older Cubans are going to get over it. My own mother is a very strong proponent of the embargo, and she liked Paul Ryan on Facebook yesterday, to my horror. So
there you go.
You know.
There you go. Well, I don't know. I just thought that it was really interesting that you were raising these questions about this, and then of course the the legitimate abortion flap has legitimate rape has caused a lot of feeling that these guys might be in some trouble. But when you really look at the polling, I don't think they are in that much trouble.
No, here's the thing. I think that one of the Republicans are absolute masters of messaging.
Yes, they are. Oh boy,
they are fantastic.
You and I have spent some time doing messaging, and
yes,
I think we both can appreciate good messengers when we see them.
And the Democrats are remarkably either complacent or arrogant. I can't figure it out. In assuming
incompetent.
Whatever you want to call it, and assuming that their message is in and of itself so fantastic that people will see the reason for it. So how it ends up playing out is that no matter how solid the issue is for the Democrats, the Republicans manage to turn it around and put them on the defensive. The fact that they're playing
so on point with that.
That they're playing defense on Medicare is absolutely astounding to me. It's like, are you kidding me?
Right.
What happened to you guys?
We are the ones who are going to save Medicare from this evil Democratic president who wants to.
It's unbelievable.
And every day something new happens, and I look at it and I think, is there a team on the field? I'm not sure.
David Axelrod, where the hell are you?
Tell me. Because again, don't get me started on this, but the messaging after the passage of Obamacare was so abysmal.
Horrendous.
And everybody was saying, well, in a couple of weeks people will realize that this is going to be a good thing, and of course they never did.
They never did. They kept waiting for something to happen that didn't happen. But the issue is right now. My question is, if you know, for example, that you need Latinos to win Colorado, if you know, for example, that you need Latinos to win Florida, if you know, for example, that you have like this much of a margin in Ohio, and that you have a Latino voter community that is actually bigger than that margin, why the hell aren't you doing commercials in those particular states that have Pulitzer Prize winning Junot Diaz, for example, who's an Obama supporter, saying, hi, I'm Junot Diaz, and I wouldn't have been able to go to college without Pell Grants. Right now, Obama wants to save Pell Grants. Romney wants to kill Pell Grants.
Right. End of message.
Please,
thank you.
vote for Obama. It's that simple.
Right.
Why don't you have, Gloria Stefan doing that? Why don't you have a bunch of Latino celebrities who are already on board, who speak English and Spanish, who would do that gladly for free because they understand how important it is. That's crazy to me.
They've ceded the territory to Romney's deep Mexican roots.
That's got to be the reason. That's right. Well, he is kind of a Latino in a way, isn't he? Could we go back again and talk about this? There was a press release issued yesterday, and there were some stories in the papers about the fact that the CPS schools advanced a little bit in the test scores, basically. But you said that you, as you're wont to do, you sat down with some of the numbers and looked through them, and you have some interesting twists on those things. Tell us what you were talking about earlier.
Well, I saw the story about ACT scores being released, for the state and the city, and I read we talk about messaging. I read the messaging from 125 South Clark Street from the mayor's office about ACT scores. But one of the things I went back to just take a quick look at, and I wouldn't call it research, but just looked at the data quickly, had to do with schools. Well, I was interested in what I didn't hear in the mayor's announcement or in the CPS announcement, and I didn't hear any mention of improvements at the mayor's favored AUSL schools. And I've written about several of these schools over the last year.
We should just say AUSL schools are the schools that are being managed by a
Academy for Urban
quasi-private.
School Leadership
Right.
that David Vitale, who heads the Board of Education now, used to be the chairman of AUSL. Tim Cawley, who's the chief administrative officer of CPS, used to be one of the directors of AUSL. They've been getting a lot of schools handed to them, money handed to them since...
To turn the schools around.
Right, since Duncan was around. But, you know, a couple of things struck me. Dyett High School, which was voted by the board last February to be phased out. We're going to move all these kids out, and they're going to move to Phillips High School, which is an AUSL school. Had an ACT score, as reported yesterday, that exceeded the ACT score at Phillips High School. Not only that, Phillips High School ACT score dropped from last year. Its Prairie State Achievement Test scores dropped from last year. So we're phasing out a school, Dyett, presumably because it's been on probation and has poor test scores, moving kids to a school where the ACT scores, as reported yesterday, are even worse, where the Prairie State Achievement scores, as reported yesterday, are even worse. Now Dyett, you've been out there, I'm sure, it's quite a nice facility. Yeah. And keep an eye on it and see where it ends up, because you know there's usually more to these.
It's going to make a fine charter school, is what you're saying?
Well, we'll see, and you know.
Although you never know. I mean, a lot of those. That's in my neighborhood. I live down in Kenwood, and in fact, it's the school that I would have to send my son to, were he high school age. And Crispus Attucks up on. You know, what is it, State and 35th, has been sitting there empty for years and years, and that was also a fairly nice facility. So I don't know that the niceness, for lack of a better term, of a facility means much. I think there's so much stuff that's just, so many facilities that are in fact just sitting around empty. It's absolutely astounding.
Right, which begs the question though, and I think Karen Lewis has been raising this, that if we talk about the number of schools that CPS says are underutilized right now, you know, using whatever data you want to use to get to that definition, why are we insisting then on opening 60, 70, you know, new charter schools, new turnaround schools? I mean,
yeah. Well, I mean, I take it you buy into this notion that there will have to be many closings, maybe 100 closings.
Well, I think when you see population trends with, you know, 100,000 kids leaving, or people leaving, you know, different parts of the city over time, that would seem to be, you know, it's going to follow suit. But the other AUSL schools I saw, Collins High School, ACT score dropped, Ora High School, ACT score dropped. So to the extent the mayor wants to hold this group and these schools out as, you know, the beacons on the hill, you know, let's take a look at the test scores that you're using to close other schools, and you know, use the same standard, and we'll see what happens.
You know, I'm afraid we've pretty much talked ourselves out of time here. I can't believe how quickly the show goes by sometimes. But we will definitely be following up on this, and we'll be checking in with you again, Matt, on this to get some of that information about what is happening there. That is going to do it for this show today, which was put together by real human beings in an old school television studio. There's no computers to go haywire to, as has been happening at all the other stations around the dial the last couple of days. I think that's personally kind of funny. You have been watching Old School Chicago Newsroom right here. It's community service of CAN TV. Of course, you can find us here on cable, as you know, and you can see us online at the address that is right here at the bottom of your screen. See it anytime. You can also subscribe on iTunes, and I hope you will do so. I'm Ken Davis saying thanks so much for watching us, and we'll be back next week with another edition of Chicago Newsroom right here on CAN TV. Thanks a lot. See you next week.